Hello and welcome to this tutorial showcasing some of the new and improved features for creating and editing dynamic blocks in BricsCAD 26.2. For this hands-on video, we've got step-by-step instructions and datasets for download. Check your screen for the download call to action, or if you're watching this on YouTube, check out the information in the description box below so you can try these great new features for yourselves. In this session, I'll walk you through the key things you need to know to work with dynamic blocks. We'll start by enabling experimental mode, which you'll need in order to create and edit dynamic blocks. Then I'll show you how to add your existing dynamic blocks to a tool palette, and more importantly, how to edit their properties once they're there. After that, I'll explain the new BC parameter system variable and how it lets you create constraint parameters inside dynamic blocks. And finally, I'll wrap things up by showing you how to create and use lookup tables in your dynamic blocks. To work with dynamic blocks in BricsCAD, experimental mode must be enabled. From the Start page, click the Discover pill in Experimental New Features, click Enable and then OK. Close and restart BricsCAD for the changes to take effect. As a reminder, dynamic block editing and creation is not available in the United States. Next, when BricsCAD is launched, notice the splash screen indicates experimental mode is enabled. It's also displayed at the top left of the BricsCAD title bar. Now, previously, you could add dynamic blocks to a tool palette, but you didn't have much control over their properties. Now you do. Add your dynamic blocks to a tool palette from the Drawing Explorer, but before you open the Drawing Explorer, know what tool palette you want the blocks to be on, because the blocks will be added to the current tool palette. So I'll create a new palette just for dynamic blocks by clicking the plus sign, providing a name, dblocks, and then clicking Add. Then open the Blocks page of the Drawing Explorer and select the blocks you want to add. I'm selecting them all. Right-click and choose the option Add to Existing Tool Palettes, and now the blocks are on the palette. By default, there isn't much control when dragging the door off the palette into the drawing. You can select the block and change properties by clicking on the various grips. You can flip the hinge and the swing, set the door size, change the opening angle of the panel. Now, these properties can also be changed from the Properties panel down here at the Custom section. Let's place that door into a room. Now I can snap to place the door, but there are no other placement controls. In 26.2, we have the ability to edit dynamic block properties directly from the Tool Properties panel in the Tool palette. This enhancement gives you far greater control over how each block behaves when inserted into your drawing. So select the block, then click the three dots to the right, and then click on Properties to view all the editable properties for this door block. So you can configure these key properties before inserting the block. For example, if you want to allow rotation when the door block is inserted, turn that on. You can ensure that the block is placed on the correct layer. And you can define the default size of the door and the opening angle of the panel. Once these settings are applied, your configured version of the dynamic block is inserted exactly as you just defined it. Now, after placement, you can still adjust the block's behavior by, again, using the grips on the block or modifying the settings or properties again in the Properties panel. Now, this update makes it easier to import, test, and reuse your existing dynamic blocks right in BricsCAD. And that makes it easier than ever to maintain consistent, efficient workflows across your projects. We've added a new experimental feature called BC parameter, which lets you create constraint parameters in dynamic blocks. It is experimental, available only on the Windows operating system from the command line, and only available for those of you outside of the United States. What does it do? Well, when creating or editing a dynamic block, you can create these constraint parameters: linear, horizontal, and vertical, aligned, angular, radial, and diameter. There is also a convert option to convert existing dimensional constraints to constraint parameters. Why? So you can define editable parameters in Dynamic Block Editor that control and drive geometry behavior in model space. Here, the grip changes the size of the circle. And now you can see all the existing and new dynamic block action parameters in the Parameters Manager. Ongoing improvements are being made to dynamic block creation and editing in BEdit, as well as to dynamic block behavior throughout BricsCAD. Now, some behaviors involving constraints, especially in dynamic blocks that combine actions and constraints, may be inconsistent today, with further refinements planned for upcoming releases. Let's start with a simple block of a rectangle. Double-click to enter block edit mode, and notice I have the choice to edit this as either a parametric block or dynamic block. I'll choose dynamic. Within BEdit, we see this as a simple polyline. Now, to create a new constraint parameter, at the command line, type BC parameter, and here are the options. I'm going to add two linear constraints, one for the width and one for the height of the rectangle. To do that, select the linear from the command line and your start point and end point, which will be the midpoint of the left side of the rectangle to the midpoint of the right side, and then move your cursor down below to place D1. Open the Parameters Manager. Now, you may also need to expand the dimensional constraint parameters, and we see that D1 now appears here. Right-click and choose Animate to see the behavior of the parameter. Let's repeat the process to add the other linear constraint. So again, type BC parameter, choose linear, and choose the midpoint of the top and bottom line segments, and move your cursor to the right to place D2. And again, we can use Animate to see the behavior. We can also open the mechanical browser, expand the parameters, and also animate from here. Let's close and save the block. And when we're out of BEdit, just in the drawing, with the block selected, now you have these grip points to adjust the width and the height. Or use the properties from the Properties panel to make some changes. Here's another example with an existing dynamic block of a light fixture containing a block table. In BEdit, we see the existing dimensional constraints parameters and the existing 2D dimensional constraints. Using BC Parameters Convert option, convert the radius 1 constraint to a BC parameter. It then appears in the Dimensional Constraint Parameters folder. Again, use Animate in BEdit to preview the change to the circle's radius. After saving and exiting BEdit, notice the new grip to adjust the circle's radius. Also note that BC Parameters is Windows only and not available in the US, and blocks that mix geometric constraints with constraint parameters are not yet fully supported. We've also continued enhancing the dynamic block editing environment, and now it includes support for lookup tables. A lookup table is a dynamic block that defines named combination of values that determine how that block behaves for each allowed configuration. So rather than manually adjusting multiple parameters, users can simply select from a predefined set of combinations that are available either through a lookup grip right on the block or from within the Properties panel. For example, take a window dynamic block. You can use a lookup table to list all the valid height and width combinations. Selecting a size from that list automatically updates the dynamic block. Lookup tables differ, however, from block tables. One example is that block tables only list individual parameter values, such as the height and the width, separately. With a block table, users can choose a width and a height independently, but they can't select that predefined named window size. Also, block tables can include constraints, but lookup tables do not. This is an existing dynamic block of a window. It includes predefined width and height values that I can change by the grips here on the window itself or through the Properties panel. Let's create a lookup table that will allow us to select from approved window sizes. Now, this could reflect a manufacturer's specification, ensuring that only valid real-world window sizes can be selected. But before we begin, a quick reminder. Dynamic block editing is an experimental feature, and to use it, the experimental features must be enabled. To edit the block, double-click it to enter block editor mode. Before making any changes, I do want to mention that you can adjust the block editor options by typing BE settings at the command line. This opens the settings dialog box. Because I'm working in experimental mode, this settings dialog box, also in experimental mode, is available. And here you can change the grip colors, the size, font names, other things, maybe the background color in the editor itself. Remember, any changes made in settings are effective immediately. So, back to creating the lookup table. From the Action Parameters area of the ribbon, we'll first add the lookup parameter, and then we'll add the lookup action. Now, if you're not seeing these action parameters area, make sure that you are using the 2D Drafting Modern workspace. So, first, the lookup parameter, we'll select it and place it over here. And I'm right-clicking to accept one grip. Then we'll place the lookup table action, selecting the lookup parameter we just created, and now I can place the lookup table action. Now, if I can't place it exactly where you want it, check your ortho mode and turn that off, and now I can place this wherever I want. Let me close the property lookup table because I do want to talk about the pull-down menus here. Notice that these will change and display the last parameter or action selected. So if your ribbon looks a little different than mine, that's the reason. Okay, back to the creation of our lookup table. Double-click the action to reopen the property lookup table. We'll start by adding the existing width and height parameters by clicking Add Properties. You can select both the window width and the window height at the same time. Just hold down the Shift key. We're adding this as an input properties and click OK. When you click this little down arrow, you'll see the values that are already listed in the block. So we can use all of these or some of them. I won't do all of them. So let's add the window width values that we want to include. So 30, 36, 42, and 48. And notice that additional rows are added as I need them. And we can do the same for the window height, starting with 24, 30, 36, and 42. Over here on the right side of the dialog box, you see the lookup properties, and specifically lookup 1. This represents the actual lookup table that will be visible and selectable in the drawing. Here's where you'll add the option names that will be displayed for the lookup table. So in this example, I'm entering the predefined width and height combinations that represent the valid window sizes. So we can just type in 30 by 24, etc. Now just be sure that you type in exactly what you want to be visible. The audit button searches for errors in the property lookup table. There are no errors here, so that's all good. We're done here. We can just hit OK to close the property lookup table. And next, we can test the block right within the D-Block editor. This opens a new drawing tab specifically for testing. Select the block. Here we can see the grip. Click on the grip. We see the lookup table to select the various size combinations, as well as the lookup table is displayed in the Properties panel, and we can also change or make our selection from there. That's all good. Let's close the test block window, close and save the block, and here it is in model space. Lookup tables created in BricsCAD round trip into AutoCAD, as seen here. Here's our dynamic block of the window. Now the grip is slightly different, but the information is the same. And the lookup table also displays in the Properties palette. Thank you for joining me for this tutorial that covered the essentials of working with dynamic blocks, including enabling experimental mode, adding and editing dynamic blocks to tool palettes, using the BC parameter system variable to create and work with constraints, and building lookup tables within dynamic blocks.